All right, welcome everybody to Unraveling the Unexplained. My name is Kat. I am a longtime astral traveler and spirit consultant. This is my brother John, longtime fan of the creepy, paranormal, and unexplained.
Good evening.
And he has picked out a video for me to watch and react to. I'm not sure what it is, but we're going to find out, so let's jump into it.
Whether tales of cryptids or ghostly apparitions, every community has its own folklore. This week, we pay a visit to a small town in Tennessee, which was plagued by a spirit so vengeful that it was the first in US history to receive blame for an actual recorded death. The legendary Bell Witch.
I've never heard of this.
Yeah, no, it's like sometime in the 1800s, like 200 years ago.
He's got kind of a long intro.
But it's a good
Nestled on the outskirts of metropolitan Nashville lies the small town of Adams, Tennessee. If you look beyond its humble exterior, however, you will find a dark past. Stories of a haunting which began little over 200 years ago and which reportedly continues to this day. In 1804, John Bell, along with his wife Lucy Williams Bell and approximately 10 other families, began an arduous trek from Edgecombe County, North Carolina, to Red River, Tennessee. Over the next several years, the Bells would become successful farmers and prosper in their new home. One of the other groups that had also made the move from North Carolina was the Batts family, and they would come to hate the Bells after a traumatic accident in 1816. Frederick Batts, the head of his household, was seriously injured whilst working on his farm, and would spend the rest of his life physically impaired as a result. As Frederick was no longer able to work, the family's situation became desperate. He would be forced to sell parts of his property in order to make ends meet. Some of this land was purchased by John Bell. Frederick's wife, Kate, accused Bell of exploiting their unfortunate situation, as he had bought the land for much less than it was worth. She swore to Bell that she would make him and his family pay for this supposed misdeed. Bell had also purchased a young slave girl from Frederick's brother, Benjamin. Bell felt that the girl was too young to take with him at the time of purchase, however, and decided to leave the youngster with her mother for a while longer. When he eventually came to collect her, Benjamin reneged on the agreement, feeling that she was worth more than had already been paid. After much bickering, Bell sold the girl back to Benjamin for more than the purchase price, thus extorting even more money from the Batts family. Shortly after the deal with the slave girl was settled, and unbeknownst to John Bell, Benjamin Batts filed a lawsuit against him for extortion. Bell had no idea the lawsuit even existed, and so failed to attend the hearing. Without Bell being present to contest the claims, the court sided with Benjamin. The judgment soon found its way back to Red River and was heard by the local church. Although Bell protested the ruling, it would nonetheless lead to his eventual excommunication, which some say would open the door for evil to invade his home. Due to her husband's immobility,
Man, the legal system in the 1800s.
I mean, you're not. They didn't just send him a letter saying, "Hey, there's a court thing. You're sued." Maybe.
I mean, well, let's go back to backyard handshake deals for property and slave girls that go sour, and then you're sued for extortion.
It was like there's no regulation on these deals, so how are you suing something
I don't know.
in the first place? And then I guess the church ain't down for any of that. Excommunication because somebody sued you. You
lost a lawsuit you didn't even know you had, so you got excommunicated, and that's when the evil began.
Yeah, different time,
Yeah. What? How did witches get blamed for this? We're gonna find out.
It comes up.
Everything was witches back in the day. What the hell?
Kate Batts became the prominent member of her family. Boisterous, harsh, loud and spiteful, she was widely disliked by others in the community, and because of some questionable behaviour in church, they also believed that Kate was practicing witchcraft.
She fell asleep.
They suspected that the tragedy which befell her husband was punishment from God for practicing such evil, although none of them dared to confront her directly with these accusations. Most people chose instead to avoid her as much as possible. Kate, it seems, was far too intimidating.
I know, I feel it.
In 1817, not long after his excommunication, Bell was hunting on his land when he encountered a creature that he had never seen before. He described it as having the body of a large dog, the head of a rabbit, and being covered in black fur. Startled at seeing such an abomination, he fired his musket at the animal, but when he looked to see if he'd killed or injured the creature, it was nowhere to be seen. Strange activity started to occur at the family home. During the evenings, the Bells began hearing what sounded like stones being thrown against the exterior of the house. Despite constantly checking for trespassers, there were none to be found. After a while, Bell suspected this to be the work of the Bats family. That was until the sounds began occurring inside the household. Loud thuds, scrapings on the floors and walls, and the sounds of rats gnawing at the legs of beds were heard throughout the home at all hours of the night, but they were never able to track down the source of these disturbances. Although it was a frustration, the family simply tried to ignore it. Nevertheless, the activity soon escalated to physical attacks. One night, their 14-year-old daughter, Elizabeth Betsy Bell, was awoken by the now familiar sounds. When she tried to investigate, she found that her hair had been tied in knots around the bedpost. Unable to get up, she was then slapped repeatedly by an unseen force. Responding to her screams, the family rushed in to find Betsy with red, hand-shaped welts all over her face. Terrified, she described what had happened, and it wasn't long before the youngest sons would also show the same hand-shaped welts on their legs and faces. Not wishing to make this a public affair and possibly tarnish the reputation of the family any further, Bell advised everyone to keep quiet about the activity. They began praying, begging to be released from the evil that was tormenting them, all to no avail. Over the next few weeks, visual apparitions began to appear. The slaves reported seeing strange birds and animals, some of which they claimed could talk. While walking in a field, Betsy saw the apparition of a girl in a green dress, hanging by her hands from a tree limb before she disappeared without trace. Bell confided in his friend and neighbour, James Johnston. He and his wife arrived at the Bell home shortly afterwards and prayed with them to rid the house of the evil presence. One evening, Johnston demanded to know the name of the entity, and a disembodied voice was heard to say, After several nights of trying unsuccessfully to cleanse the home, Johnston advised his neighbour to reach out to the wider community. News of the haunting spread quickly and far wider than anyone anticipated. Many people from surrounding areas and some from quite far away came to the Bell family home to witness the poltergeist's activity. Eventually, news reached Army General and future United States President Andrew Jackson. Jackson decided to take a small group of his troops to the Bell home and make camp there for a few days. One of Jackson's men claimed to have brought along silver bullets and bragged to his fellow soldiers that he planned to use them on the witch and kill her. As the group neared the Bell property, the wheels of their wagon seized and would not move, despite the repeated efforts of the troops and horses. Almost at the point of abandoning the wagon and returning to Nashville, Jackson supposedly apologized for the behavior of his soldier. Immediately after this, the wagon began to move freely, as if nothing had happened, and Jackson's troops arrived without further incident. Despite planning to stay several nights, the group returned to Nashville after only one, and although it is not written in any official document, Jackson is reported to have said, "I would rather face the whole of the British Army than spend another night at the Bell house." Not all of the Bell family received such harassment from the so-called Bell Witch, however. Lucy Bell, John's wife, was treated in the opposite manner. In 1820, she was diagnosed with a severe case of pleurisy, and there was some question as to whether or not she would survive the illness. Whilst Lucy was bedridden, Kate would often sing comforting gospel hymns, and would also leave hazelnuts and grapes on her bed, apparently materializing from thin air. At the same time that Lucy's health was improving, her husband's was declining rapidly. On the morning of December the 20th, John Bell was found deceased in his bed. A strange pungent scent was coming from Bell's mouth, and a vial with an unknown cloudy liquid was discovered nearby, giving off the same odour. Speculation as to who poisoned Bell was rife, and when it was suggested that Lucy may have been responsible, Kate's disembodied voice apparently spoke up, replying, "I fixed his medicine last night and gave him a big dose of it. He'll never get out of that bed again." For the first time in US history, an actual documented death was blamed on a supernatural entity. Not content with simply killing John,
He said for the first time. Are there other times that...
that might be something to look into, but I think what the implication here is that this is the first time it was put down in like an official documentation, cause of death, angry ghost, which maybe there are other times. This was the 1800s, so there's probably a good 100 years
Yeah, there could be other instances.
Yeah.
Kate was said to have made an appearance at his memorial. During the burial service, she further tormented friends and family by mocking Bell, laughing and singing drinking songs. After the funeral, the activity began to diminish. Kate had apparently achieved her goal of tormenting and killing her nemesis, and the family believed her to be gone for good. That was until the spring of 1821, when Betsy Bell received a proposal of marriage from a well-respected young man by the name of Joshua Gardner. Betsy once again saw the apparition of the little girl in the tree, who warned her not to marry this man, then vanished as she had done previously. Not daring to take a chance on the poltergeist's return, Betsy broke off the engagement, and Gardner moved away from the area. So what are we to make of this story? One has to remember that most people of this era were unable to read or write, so many of the stories were passed on verbally for many years after the supposed events took place. It is impossible to determine how many of the stories were embellished upon, or even completely fabricated before they were finally written down. The Bell Witch haunting went on for many years, and there were far more tales and other occurrences than we have time to recount here, but it is entirely possible that many of the supposed incidents were concocted to cover up the murder of John Bell. It should be noted that Lucy Bell, John's wife, was the younger sister of John Williams Jr., who was the father of none other than Kate Williams Batts. Could Bell's death have been the result of a conspiracy between Kate and Lucy? It would certainly explain why Lucy was excluded from the witch's wrath. But then, what would Lucy gain by torturing her own children? Kate Batts was reported as alive in the 1830 census, so it certainly was not her spirit that was responsible for the hauntings. It is also worth noting that Richard Powell, Betsy's eventual husband, was very highly educated, and could have created some of the strange happenings that would not have been well understood by the people of the time. This may in turn have led to mass hysteria. Powell had a documented fondness for Betsy, even when he was still married to his wife Esther, who died in 1821, the same year that Gardner proposed to the youngster. Could he have been responsible for these incidents as a way of getting close to her? On the other hand, there are those who believe the whole saga was completely genuine, and that Kate Batts had conjured up a spirit or demon in order to avenge the perceived wrongdoings against her family. Even today, there are still incidents that occur in the area. The local townsfolk, including the modern-day Bell family, have experienced many strange events that are not so easily explained. As a young boy, Bob Bell, who is still alive today, recalls an incident involving his grandmother. In a state of terror, she made a phone call to Bob's father, asking him to come and investigate a disturbance and check for intruders. When they arrived, they found nothing out of place, until they went into the kitchen. The cabinet in which the family's china was locked away was now open, and the dishes were thrown about all over the floor. Oddly, not a single dish had been broken or damaged in the least. Another recent incident involved Tim Henson, a local historian and curator at the town's museum. According to him, people who visit the Bell property are advised not to take anything home with them. Henson spoke of a man who took a rock from the cave that is located there, and who then apparently lost his wife, his job, and his home within 3 days of his visit. It is entirely possible that these events would have happened anyway, and that his taking of the rock was mere coincidence.
I was gonna say.
But then again, who knows?
It sounds like his life
Still,
was a mess to begin with.
if you ever happen to visit Red River, or the town of Adams as it is known today, and talk to the people who live there, you may not walk away a believer, but hopefully you'll be wise enough to give the Old Bell property the respect it deserves.
Alright, so what's your take on this one?
Well, first of all, we will link this video and the creator in the description. Please check them out. Go support the original video and the original creator. This guy has a ton of awesome videos on his channel. So
very well done.
go check that out, please. Alright, I mean, should we talk about...
There's a lot to break down here.
You want to talk about summoning and witches?
This,
we can do that.
This is something I was curious about, because there's a lot that could be covered here in terms of, like, ghost, summoned entity, real, not real. There's a lot to kind of break down here, so...
Once again, you have a really old story that's probably blown out of proportion over the years and everything, right?
Yeah.
Now, is it possible to summon something and have it be having effects such as some of this?
Yeah, that's the thing I'm kind of curious about. You know more about this kind of stuff than I do.
You know.
I know.
You know it is. You grew up with me.
Yeah.
So you
there were some parallels here.
That's what. Yeah, you know that's possible to. Even when you're doing it accidentally, don't recommend summoning. Don't summon things. Okay, it turns out not to be a fun game.
So you think that's like it's possible that maybe that individual Kate Bates or whatever might have tried something like that?
That's certainly possible. I think the husband was poisoned by his wife.
That's like it could have been
vials of liquid that are administered. That's not done by spirits. So that was done by somebody in the household.
Okay. So it's like conceivably, your take on it could be like there's a combination of very practical, real things happening, like the husband being poisoned, but it's also possible that this was combined with a entity of some sort that got thrown into the situation by somebody who, through whatever means, knew how to do something she probably shouldn't have done or whatever.
Right.
Like, how do you, like, I've always been kind of curious, like, how do you get that information? Like, how does somebody acquire the means and knowledge of doing something like that in the first place? Is it just something that kind of crops up and, like, can it be done totally by accident, or?
Well, I mean, I got it out of a book in the library.
Yeah.
So, it really isn't, and it's not, okay, so it's not any of those kinds of rituals or things that you're doing. It's not so much about the specific practice or words or energy. It's about the energy involved, right? It's about your intention, and it's about your own energy. It's about the summoning that you put into it. So all the rest of that, and it's the same for any ritual that you're doing, it's all whatever is symbolic and meaningful to you. So people just use whatever, back in the day, they used whatever natural elements were available that meant something to them. They're like, oh, sage smells like this, so it's what it means to you that matters.
So this would kind of explain how different cultures have different practices for those kind of things.
Right, yeah, because it's all about your own intent and the meaning that something has to you. Like, you would use roses for a love spell, but that's because they smell nice and they're pretty. You could use a Tide Pod for it today because it smells nice and it's comforting. It doesn't matter. It's whatever it means to you.
So, strictly speaking, like, the actual accoutrements, whether it's, whatever goes into the ritual, is completely about the individual or whatever they were taught by whatever culture they were in. Absolutely. But it's the thought and intent and energy being put into it that creates the effect.
And the thing about it is it's a lot of big misunderstandings. Like, it doesn't matter when you're doing it, whether you're going,
whole solstice and eclipse thing or whatever.
Well, I mean, that has to do with the alignment of planets and energies. So, but it doesn't matter what you're calling upon. It doesn't, like, you can say I'm calling the corners, or you can say I'm summoning Satan, or you could say angels and guides, please protect me. Like, you could be, it's entirely possible that this Kate person was praying to God and her angels to do something about this horrible man.
Didn't even necessarily require her to have obtained any knowledge about witchcraft from, I don't know, some local lady or library or whatever.
Right. There's a tendency, especially within certain religious traditions, to want to blame everything on the devil, or, you know what I mean, other kinds.
But this lady could have just been straight up very pissed off and asked for God to strike down her enemies.
Yeah.
And coincidentally, it just kind of started happening, and she could have, maybe she didn't even know that it was her that was doing it.
Listen, folks, it's a fine line between Satanism and miracles, okay? Because it's really all about how you cultivate and use your own energy. It's a manifestation to summon something or to have a desired effect.
Because it's like, it's hard to know how much of that would be, all that information would be accurate now, because it's an old tale retold and embellished many times. Like, who knows if the whole Andrew Jackson angle even happened? Oh, the U.S. Army president who happened to be, general, you happened to become president of the United States just happened to show up. You know, that's...
The 1800s was a different time.
There was a ghost. Man, time to get the army involved.
Right. No, it's entirely possible that they summoned something or summoned up some kind of energy that was messing around. I mean, honestly, the first thought I had when the little girl's hair was tied to the bedpost was, does she have little brothers? And then it was like, yeah, she got little brothers. It was the very next thing.
So the kids could have been messing with each other.
The kids could have been messing with each other, you know what I mean? And then not wanting to tell the parents, you know. There's a lot about it that could have easily just... And since there was already, there's a witch, they're like, oh, it must have been the witch, you know what I mean?
So it's like you have two families, there's bad blood between the families, things start going wrong. It'd be pretty easy for, just kind of toss blame around on a witch or something. And if there happened to actually be an entity that got involved somehow, that would just add fuel to the fire.
Right. But I would imagine that the entity involved is causing the minor mischief, the sound of things shuffling around on the floor, or rats, or the rocks being hit, you know what I mean? It's
like, in your experience, do they really ever get aggressive enough to do, like, harm?
It can. It depends on it depends on how much energy you're putting into the situation. How scared are you? How angry are you? How much are you fueling the situation? Things can escalate that way, yeah. But it isn't necessary, or it's not necessarily an automatic thing.
Right.
But you're dealing, especially with this, in a time period where people were swift to believe all kinds of stuff and pour their
and go kind of hardcore when it comes to matters of vengeance or whatever.
Right. So, it could be that this woman, Kate, didn't even realize, like, she might have just been praying for God to do something about her enemy next door, But if you got the will and the energy and the strong enough intent behind it, it's going to start manifesting. Stuff. The ritual I performed when I was a kid was for summoning fairies. I was thinking Tinkerbell. You know what I mean? So it really is. It's the power and intent that you put behind something that opens up energetic pathways for stuff like that to come through.
All right. Yeah, makes sense.
But, it's... like they said, that the woman wasn't dead or anything. It wasn't her spirit. It wasn't the vengeful spirit of this Kate person.
It was something else, if anything at all, yeah.
I'm surprised she didn't get herself lynched.
That's honestly one of the thoughts I had, is that this lady is lucky this didn't, like, come back to her in some way. Like, especially if the story is saying that the entity is going around proclaiming itself as Kate, you'd think this unfortunate woman would have had a mob at her door at one point or another.
And for all you know, the wife was making that up. They were making that up completely because they didn't like her.
Yeah.
Let's get her hung as a witch for all of this. So, again, with old stories, it's hard to tell. It could have easily been the wife didn't like her husband and decided to poison him, and didn't like the lady next door and decided to blame it on her.
Yeah.
Who knows? But
it is an interesting story.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds like it's an old one. I'm surprised that they put that death down to spirit spirits did it.
Instead of just poison.
Here's the vial with liquid in it
Well,
that
maybe
was
they didn't-
obviously in his mouth.
maybe
And it
they
must
didn't-
have been spirits that brought a vial of poison into the house.
I guess maybe they didn't really have the analytics back then to know. Can't get fingerprints off of the vial.
Right. I mean, I don't. Where did the vial of poison come from?
The witch? The ghost witch.
The ghost witch that's not dead? That's the lady next door?
The
I don't
ghost
get
witch
it.
that gives its name as the lady next door, yes, that hates the family, and especially hates the guy that got poisoned. The mystery solved.
So it's an entity. It's not. They didn't even ask the lady. They didn't even go to her. Did you like?
Yeah, was there no interrogation, no questioning? Like, hey, Kate, did you know there's this ghost that keeps giving us your name, and the guy you really, really hate just got poisoned to death? You know anything about that?
What? Couldn't be my cousin's sister-in-law Lucy, who's married to him. I don't know.
It's interesting. Back in the day, the problem with the stories is that not everybody could read or write, and not everything got written down, so there's a lot of difficulty in confirming the veracity in things.
Yeah.
Modern day, everybody can read and write. Everything gets data recorded, but that data can now be manipulated, photoshopped, and rearranged, so now we have too much data, and nobody knows what data is real.
Yeah,
We kind of got the opposite problem nowadays.
We've got the opposite problem of everybody's out there saying everything, so who knows what's true anymore.
Yeah. It's interesting how things go.
We've come full circle back to a point where we have no idea what's happening anymore.
But that's the
There
world
it
we
is.
live in.
All right. Well, that's what I got.
Right.
Summoning
Sounds
is
about
real.
right.
I don't recommend it.
Not a good time.
But as far as this is concerned, it sounds to me like these two women were like, they just wanted to get rid of the dude. And
Kind of a family feud that got a ghost witch story built around
that's
it.
what it sounds like to me. Anyway, let us know what you think. Drop us a comment. Let us know if you think we're crazy, if you think we're onto something. If you have stories or videos you'd like us to check out, drop a comment. Let us know. Like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. And we will see you later.